Well, welcome back to the World Autism Summit, everybody. And we have a wonderful person, Dr. Chris Meletis, and he is a naturopathic doctor. And I am going to have him tell this story about himself and how he got into this world. So, Dr. Meletis, can you tell us about your journey and what brought you into this world?
Well, it all started when I was an unrealized egg in my mom and my grandmother, which we'll talk about today.
Okay.
But we won't go that far back. So I've been a naturopathic physician since 1992. I was fortunate enough to be the dean at the oldest naturopathic university in the country in all of North America. And I did that for 7 years. So I can now proudly say I was institutionalized. Maybe I should still be. And I've been very fortunate. I've written 19 books. My latest book was on the microbial mucosal milieu, mouthful, but they just say MMM. And it's how we have a skin microbiome. Many of you as parents and providers know about, of course, the gut microbiome, but all of our microbiota and all our microbiomes make the larger MMM. And I've written a couple of international articles. You'll see some on PubMed as well. But my big passion is helping those that want to have help and that need help and that might not otherwise be able to access help. So I started 16 clinics for the poor and underserved, and I still do that in my clinical practice. I'm winding down my practice, doing more lecturing these days. But that's a little bit about me. Native Oregonian, raised by two immigrant parents, and here I am. They met and in the egg thing, and then how the rest of the story goes.
And voila, here he is. Just like magic.
It is magical.
So what brought you into the World Autism Summit? What got you excited about being here?
Well, I was visiting with a colleague of mine, which I hold in great regard, and he holds you in great regard, and I do too now, because I've gotten to know all your wonderful work. And I just says the way we are going to change healthcare is by realizing it's not disease management, it's not label management. It's about empowering people so that once again you sow the seed, it will germinate, and we will all tell one another things we know, and we are a collective. And if we think of medicine in the past, we hear the old wives' tales. Mm-hmm. The oral tradition has kept everything alive, and we need to just share with one another. These are things you might consider because you feel alone, you feel on an island, you feel adrift. And so my goal is just to share what I do know. And obviously some of you all will know a lot more than I do because you've been living it. We have individuals on the spectrum in our family, and so it's near and dear to me.
And how do you hope to make the biggest impact in the world around your area of expertise?
Sharing my gift of gab and my great sense of humor.
Yeah.
So I lecture a lot. I lecture about 25 to 30 times a year. And so I just go around the country lecturing to healthcare providers. Now, thanks to COVID, if there's any thanks to COVID, we are using our technology. So I lost my hair and gained weight all during traveling. Now I can sit here in my wonderful forest behind me and just share. And so I do a lot of lectures or webinars. So if anybody wants me to participate in a webinar, let me know, because I'm just honored and privileged to be on terra firma, and we're here to share our knowledge.
We could say you can see the forest through the trees then, right?
Yes, especially from your view. My view is a little harder, but yes.
So I'd like to ask you, what is your biggest why for what you do?
Wow. So my dad came from Greece. My mom was German. And if you know anything about history, Germans and Greeks don't get along very well. So they were together for a little while for me and my sister to come along. And there's a longer story to that. And so I was always told from my immigrant father, you're going to become a doctor. So I started my life in conventional MD medical school and transferred into naturopathic medicine because my only sibling, my younger sister, said, well, if you like nutrition so much, and she happened to be with her boyfriend at the time, and he was much more buff than me and much more opinionated than myself. And he says, why don't you become a naturopath if you like that one class in nutrition you had in medical school? But you're probably just blowing smoke, blah, blah, blah. So he double dared me. I checked into naturopathic medicine. I transferred into naturopathic medicine, left my MD trajectory of finishing my first 2 years, which some would argue are some of the harder academic years. And here I am.
He didn't double dare you?
Well, no, he opened up the telephone book, which are just like payphones. People don't know it. He opened up the telephone book and said, see, it's not chiropractic, because both chiropractic and naturopathic in Oregon were near each other in the east side of the town. And so he just pretty much double dared me and, a little testosterone. And I said, Patrick, I have to prove him wrong.
There you go. So do you have any systems of, or can you think of systems of success to partner in relationships globally that would work in this area?
There are so many innovations in this field, and there's so many things that everybody's tried or has thought about trying. The biggest thing I see is, and I'll share a little bit about a group out of England called Zing Performance. There's nutritional interventions. But I think now with technology and also DNA testing, we can identify the proverbial mini little splinter that is causing one not to want to move their paw, so to speak. And so I think, there are a lot of relationships, and I'll share some of those along the way. This entire presentation, I have zero financial interest. That's my disclaimer. I'm doing this totally out of interest of helping people. And if it helps people, if it helps one person, I'm thrilled. If it helps a lot of people, I'm more thrilled. And it's just all about, as you'll hear, I'm going to speak about the Gordian knot today. It's about finally figuring out how to get through that Gordian knot.
Super. I'm really excited to see what you prepared today. I know you have some slides. So if you want to share some of those slides, I can start asking you some questions about that.
Certainly.
So you've written extensively, and you actually were a principal investigator in a project called the ZAD study for the role of zinc and attention function. What are the basics in your mind for brain performance for one and all?
Yeah. So a colleague of mine, Dr. Ben Bramwell, and I was the dean at the college at the time, he says, Chris, there's lots of research on attention deficit and zinc. We know zinc isn't necessary for omega-3 fatty acids to work in DHA. Why don't we do a little study on that? So we actually went ahead and proceeded on that. And I've been very fortunate to sit on institutional review boards, which are groups that actually forward and move clinical trials forward. And so I just said, hey, let's start looking at where's the research. And one of my first books that I wrote was on drug and nutrient interactions. I also wrote a book on nutrition. And it's just a fascinating area. And many of us have heard food is our best medicine. And when we eat our food, we're having phytonutrients, we have vitamin A, we have zinc, we have. So I look at any population and I try to find what I call the common thread underlying things. And we know in the case of autism and the spectrum, we've all gotten to that place in a different way. Just like each of us in the audience have gotten to our current health state by taking a left, a left, a right, a left, a right. Someone else took a right, a right, a right, a left. But we're all here this very moment. But maybe we all have rheumatoid arthritis. Maybe we all have attention deficit. Maybe we all have a big toe that hurts. But it's all gotten different. One was a gymnast, one was a football player, one was a soccer player. One person like myself is just purely clumsy. But now all of a sudden, all of our big toes hurt. And so what we try to do is to figure out how do we get here and treat the cause. We say it in Latin, tolle causam. And when we treat the cause, we start unraveling the knot.
Okay. So can you share a little bit more about sleep, oxygen, and mitochondria?
Well, certainly. I love quotable quotes. Benjamin Franklin said, "A penny saved is a penny earned." And many of us, and us as parents, my adult boys now are that adults as much as kids these days become adults. And I don't mean that poorly, but it's a challenging time for young adult people. But Thomas Edison said, well, the chief function of the body is to carry around the mind. So often with conventional medical mindsets is you go to an eye doctor and she will say, okay, this is what's going on with your eye. But we know that diabetes will affect the eyes. We know circulation will affect the eyes. We know sitting in front of these blue screens all day long will affect our eyes. And it was actually a concept of a penny saved is a penny earned. Benjamin Franklin also, it's like all these little sayings. So, but to think that when we think autism, we usually think, okay, well, how can we help further empower this individual, have the maximum experience with autism? But it's like, no, we got to treat the whole body. So that's, of course, part and parcel of naturopathic medicine. But then we look at the peer review literature, because I've written so extensively. I love going to the medical literature. I'm a geek that way. And many, if not all of you, know that as the gut goes, and I have highlighted here, it says, this review integrates the findings of recent years of gut microbiota and ASD association and focusing. So this is why at the end, I'm going to provide stool testing as a consideration. And if you've not been able to get really comprehensive stool testing for yourself or other individuals that might benefit from it, then that's important, because as our gut goes, so does our brain. In fact, there's that saying these days, leaky gut, leaky brain. It's actually been proven. We used to think when I graduated that the blood-brain barrier was impermeable. Nothing's going to get up into our brain. Now we know, like, oh, that wasn't true. We're learning a lot more about that. And that reminds me of I was a part of an NIH grant, National Institute of Health grant, with the local MD medical school. I was a dean at the time, and we were infusing holistic curriculum. There was chiropractors, acupuncturists, naturopathic doctors, onwards. And I got to lecture to the fourth year students graduating. And I said, you all know so much more than the people that sat nearly 5 years ago in these same chairs in your trajectory. You know more diagnostics, you know more therapeutics, but remember, 5 years from now, as you sit on your laurels and feel very confident about what you've learned, unless you're a perpetual learner, they will know more than you. And the goal is to stay up and continue in the literature. So gut health, very important. Then we look at the cerebellum. One of the big problems in medicine is we've kept our science way kind of stifled and put away. Like, okay, well, the cerebellum is for walking. Cerebellum is for how straight a line can you have. And now we know that's the case. The cerebellum, which we're going to have pictures of in a little while, actually has more neurons, more nerve cells by about 70% than the whole rest of our cerebrum. It's like, but it's just a little walnut back here, which is supposed to be quote unquote for walking and maybe talking. But now we know it has so much more. So we'll chat about that. And they are looking at that research saying, you train the cerebellum and it's going to take the frontal cortex. They say that a goldfish has a longer attention span these days than a human. But we also know that we all know our 7 digits of our telephone number, and we can keep about 7 things in our mind, and then they wander off. And is that attention deficit or just being human? But rote memory and a lot of basic functions, including socialization, which we know with the autism experience can be challenging at times and overwhelming. It's for a lot of us. Just it's a very stressful and anxious world. And that reminds me of a little boy, Arjun, that was a neighbor of mine. He was born during COVID, and he was of Indian descent, and his in-laws and relatives came over, and the grandmother is walking him back and forth. And he says, I took Arjun to the zoo. And you know what? Arjun wasn't looking at the animals. He was looking at the humans, because we had just demasked here in Oregon, and he thought humans were very interesting, even though he was at the zoo. So once again, our visual, our integration, we know that there are dietary considerations with autism. Once again, peer review medical literature. And they looked at, well, what are the issues going on? And so it's been a big argument. What happens with avoiding gluten? What happens with avoiding casein? So gluten, of course, a protein in wheat. Casein, of course, a protein in dairy. And so they looked at overall highlighting. But the problem with the medical literature, and they're trying to treat an individual or individuals, a group, that this is how a person acquired or got to the point of experiencing autism. But there's so many windy roads to how we got here that we need to realize that you're trying to fit a widget for everybody, and it doesn't work that way. So they looked at various aspects, and they found that a healthier diet, of course, people did better. Well, that's like putting I don't think we need a study for that. If I put the right octane in my car, it runs better. But I'm not picking on the study, but it's like, wow, that's very interesting. And then they looked at gluten. And the question is, gluten, we think celiac disease, or we think gluten sensitivity. If any of you were right now to go to Google, and wait, if you don't mind, until we're done chatting today, if you go to Google, type in gluten psychosis, you will actually find that it takes you right to the medical literature that indeed eating gluten for susceptible individuals, and that's the whole key here. Anybody that has been experiencing autism, it is about a susceptibility. Of course, we could be labor, whether it's the vaccines, whether it be diet when you're growing up, whether it's your microbiome. There's so many different ways in which we, once again, manifest. But they point out here in the literature, it's the various phenotypes. I have a genotype, that's my genetic makeup. And just in the journal Science, they said what we were born with our genes are not static. They're always changing. And so it's all very interesting to think, what do we have and what don't we have? So the conclusion was, hey, further research is warranted to see whether or not avoiding gluten, once again, for some individuals, just like not everybody that went ahead and eventually started experiencing ASD was related to a vaccination. It might have been a contributing factor, but now if I have, and I do, I have a methylene tetrahydrofolate polymorphism. I cannot convert folate from my vegetables. I'm the worst converter of all the different mutations. So any kind of heavy metal, any kind of toxin, I do very poorly. I'm to my wife's annoyance, the coal miner's canary. So did you just clean a bathroom? I'm upstairs. She's on the basement level, or she's just spritzed something, or one of my sons lit a candle. That's my genes. I'm the coal miner's canary. And for those that don't know, they're not old enough to remember coal miner's canaries. They used to take canaries in a little cage when they went into the coal mines, and if they fell off their perch, that would be me, because I'm super sensitive. In fact, I can smell my neighbor's fabric clings, and they're drier, and I have to walk by quick. A little too much about me. So what we have here is nutritional interventions as a way to help with autism, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you. But what we see is there is a definitive correlation between diet. But now the question is, they try to look at all individuals, they categorize them and say, what is there any dietary intervention? Well, we know if the gut is absorbing well, we're going to absorb our calories from our carbohydrates, our fats, and our proteins. But that microbiome is interesting. In fact, I just gave a big lecture on pomegranate extract. Some of us love pomegranate, whether it be seasonally or not. We know pomegranate's really wonderful. But now we know that when you consume pomegranate, your gut microbiome actually converts the pomegranate, the pinocollagens, in an lactic acid into urolithids. So random trivia. But it's because our gut is able to do that. So we don't have friendly gut, we're not going to be making our serotonin, which of course is our happy contentment. It's also neuroinhibitory. So just like GABA is, so once again, it helps us stay more calm. Dopamine, which is our contentment in our gut. But as you can see from this picture on the right, we see all kinds of things like behavior, stress response. And we're all experiencing that stress. And so we also look at how gluten and casein on the bottom picture, one of the theories out there is it actually can stimulate opioid peptides. So could you say, I'm going to go dairy-free, I'm going to go gluten-free? Easier said than done. Well, look at all the dairy and wheat products we have. But in addition, well, now you have a kiddo, let's say a person's 8 years old or 12 years old or 6 years old. And now if I do away with all dairy, where do they get their calcium from? I can tell you the average kid doesn't like their vegetables that much. I was one of them. My German mother made sure I ate my vegetables come one way or the other, or the wooden spoon. But the reality is we don't eat enough dark leafy vegetables. So you have to then start supplementing. When you change a diet, we have to make sure we're doing no harm. So once again, all kind of interesting little pathways. But the summary of the study was very interesting in what it didn't find. Long treatment times required for response. So great, let's go gluten and casein free, but they can't study that because people aren't going to do it long enough. Ketogenic diet, few existing studies, restrictive diet, potentially unpalatable, limited sampling. So like, okay, well, did you find anything from your study? And then they go down here, correction of vitamin A deficiency, which of course vitamin A is toxic. You have to be very careful of vitamin A. Has proven ineffective, may lead to adverse effects, okay? But some of the individuals in that spectrum could actually benefit from that. Not everybody. So we're suffering from, in the medical field, in my opinion, trying to have the Cinderella slipper fit everybody. And that's a big mistake, especially when we're talking about brain-body integration.
Good point. It is hard to find the panacea for everybody. So, yeah. So let's take a deeper dive into mitochondria, since you've written articles on the topic and lecture regularly on the topic.
So the mitochondria is interesting. And this is where we have to thank our moms. There's actually, if you go into peer-reviewed literature, Google or a Safari or Bing or whatever your Firefox, whatever your favorite search bar is, I don't want to seem like I'm favoring one of them, and you type in mitochondria, and particularly mitochondrial Eve, they've actually now identified that all of our mitochondria go back to an original one. That doesn't surprise us. But they've taken the word Eve out because that has a suggestion of a Judeo-Christian mindset. But they've said, okay, well, the mitochondria. So when I do a health history on a patient, so whether it be you or I'm going to be more interested in my mother's side to a degree. Yeah, I want to know what diseases come on my father's side. But my proverbial Energizer bunny battery, which fuels every one of my cells of my genetic potential, is from my mom. And so we have our genetic, this is Chris, but within me, my mom's passed now, but within me is her mitochondria still fueling me. And so I really like to know what's going on. And I give this example of my cell phone. So if I go to my app page, which you probably can't see, but you get the concept. How good is my cell phone if I had no charge? Glorified $1,000 paperweight. And so, but the apps are our DNA, but we need the energy for our apps to work. So now we know that some individuals on the spectrum of autism have different levels of muscle tone. And so now the question is, if you had a wrestler or a football player, or it'll say a weightlifter female, let's give that as an example, and she's got really big neck and really big shoulders, actually her chance of having sleep apnea is much greater because she has too much muscle tone. But too little muscle tone, or a protruding tongue, or a tongue to jaw ratio, or orthodontic work all contribute, and or even acid reflux to sleep apnea. So they actually looked at kiddos with autism and how do my kids and my neighbors' kids do without sleep? How do you and I and the audience do without sleep? We're a little bit more grumpy, a little less focused. Well, yeah, but kids, of course, are developing that neuroplasticity. So now imagine if they're suffocating a little bit. One of my kids actually turned blue throughout his childhood because he had really big tonsils. Some kids have really big adenoids, which are behind from the nose to the soft palate. And sometimes they're really nasally. One of my family members is that way right now. We're yet another doctor appointment. But now the question is, if I'm not sleeping well, let alone if I'm not getting oxygen to my brain, what's going to happen? I'm not going to perform. So they looked here and they found, and once again, Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, and this was a 2019 study, and they looked at obstructive apnea. And they're saying, yeah, I can't even get my kid to go to bed. There's no way we're going to get him or her to deal with the sleep apnea. But there's lots of new techniques now, not just a snuffleupagus mask. And they found that if you're of African American heritage, obesity, smoke in your environment, and they point out tobacco smoke, but you can also say wood burning stove there as well. And that's not a fault of anybody, just some factoids. But they actually found that a lot of these kids do have sleep issues. So a simple home sleep study, which can now be done with a little probe on your finger, and you go to bed in your bed with your little stuffed animals, even as adults, some of us like our stuffed animals, and or our live fur babies. And it's like, wow. So once again, how do we expect any child or adult to perform if they're tired? And the answer is we don't. And so with that note, when it comes to the mitochondria, when we were 30 years old, you and I, you might still be 30, I'm not, I'm double 30. And so when I was 30, I made 60 kilograms of ATP per day, the little red star down here. And that ATP is the energy currency. That's like if you tested your battery, how much charge do I have? Or on your phone, how much charge do you have? So now we have to figure out, how does our protein at the very tippy top here, our carbohydrates and our fats go down this lovely little cycle? But I do this test all the time. It's going to be a test I let the audience know about that they can order directly if they choose to. Or if you're, once again, working with a healthcare provider that will order this test, wonderful. Still, you want to bring the results to your healthcare providers, but you can see wherever there's an arrow, it says, well, in order to pass go and collect $200, like in the case of carbohydrate intake, you need certain B vitamins and you need lipoic acid. Or down here in what I call the purple washing machines, known as a Krebs cycle, citric acid, or TCA cycle, this is literally happening in our bodies this very moment. So we ate breakfast, we ate lunch, or dinner from yesterday, and we're doing some fasting. But now if I want to pass the baton between citrate to cis-aconate to isocitrate, I need to have enough iron, I need enough glutathione. and many of the audience already knows detoxifications, of course, a glutathione might already be a point of interest. But once again, interest. And so if you check out vitaliohealth.com, I'm not earning any money from mentioning their name, but they offer this test directly to consumers and also to healthcare providers that don't have access to this test because it's not a standard test offered by like a reference lab. And so I think that's kind of the whole mitochondrial side of things. The other thing I point out is that since I'm 3 decades older than 30, the research shows that the mitochondria diminish in energy and ATP production, all things being equal, by 10%. So that means that I'm making 30% less energy to run my genetic apps that I used to. So that part of the aging process invariably, along with less nitric oxide. And one of my providers in my office, she has a 33-year-old daughter with significant spectrum challenges, still lives at home. And there's no question, we've done the testing, mitochondria are part of it. And so that's what I have to say about that.
So getting good sleep, great oxygenation, and testing for and supporting mitochondria are key. Are there non-supplement approaches to supporting neuroplasticity?
Yeah, and the answer is yes, without a question. And the reality is that when we look at the human cell and we look at oxygen, right now as I sit here and as the audience sits and listens to me drone on about these interesting topics to me, but I'm a geek, I'm a nerd on this stuff. I really enjoy reading about this, and hopefully I'll make it understandable and interesting to you folks. But 20% of my oxygen is being used by my brain. 20% of my glucose is being used by my brain. And then, of course, the others, trillions of cells in my body are, of course, having to manifest. So if you think of a cell, a single cell of the trillions of cells in your body, well, those cells join up and they make a tissue. That makes an organ. That makes an organ system. That makes us, the organism. But once again, I gave a lecture, and I was in New York about 13, 14 years ago. I'm from Oregon, so I was coming from the West Coast. I flew in at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I had a lecture at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time the next morning. And I get up on stage, I have my suit on, I make my silly joke as I always do. Well, I can tell you I had to wake up an extra hour to do my hair. Crowd laughs. This was a 300 or 400 medical doctors. I'm a keynote speaker for 90 minutes. I'm going to stand up there. And I'm going to talk about genetics. That was my topic back then. I was usually trying to say ahead of the proverbial curve before that term was made popularized. And so I said, we're talking about genetics and epigenetics and all this, but let me ask a question to you all, because you're functional medicine, you're thinking broadly, you're looking at the literature. How many cells in my body have to be tired? So it's 4 o'clock Oregon time. I just flew across the country, and many of you in New York, it was on the Avenues of the Americas in Manhattan. And I said, and you folks had to commute and or wake up early to be here as well. How many cells in our body have to be tired before we feel tired? And I said, I don't know. And if any of you know, please let me know now or after. No takers at the now and none at the end. And then I said, let me ask a simpler question. And the reason I'm bringing this up as a story, because I was not planning on having that story back then nor now, is I said, how many cells in my finger have to hurt before I say, ow, my finger hurts? And I told the audience, once again, extemporaneously, not planning it, I said, now we've all cut ourselves, like cooking or cutting something or whatnot, or opening a box. But is it kind of strange? Sometimes the littlest things like a paper cut hurts more than a big boo-boo. I don't think I used the word boo-boo back then, I will now. And I said, or have you not went ahead and with those cells in your finger actually had a little splinter, and that little microscopic splinter, like, ooh, it was exquisite, whereas a big splinter hurts less. How much don't we know about our bodies? A lot. And so that's the goal here, is to stay humble and realize as long as we're testing and we're collecting data, any data you have, whether it shows something or not, and we'll talk about this on a couple of the slides I have coming up, data is important, because if we're not testing, we're guessing. And so when it comes to the mitochondria, we need to have oxygen for a process called oxidation phosphorylation. And so that's paramount. And unfortunately, and I identify as a rabbit, by the way, I'm tired. I need a trickle charge sometimes to get going. Coffee doesn't do it anymore for me. That's how gone my little adrenal glands are. And I do a lot of mitochondrial support. And we know that the microbiome And the mitochondria are critical to consider when we're working on maximizing the potential of anybody, including individuals on the spectrum. So much of the time we say, okay, well, you're on the spectrum, so we're going to treat you this way. No, it's a human being with health needs, and we need to figure out how did they get there? What are the obstacles? And I give the example that, Karen, if you and I were to walk around a track together, you know, one of those little tracks with the lines. Now, if they didn't remove the hurdles, it would take us a lot longer to walk around that track because we'd have to walk around them and walk over them. Our goal and the nature of this talk is let's identify what hurdles are there for each unique individual, which dietary needs are needed for each individual, and then we're actually getting to the crux of that individual need. And so with that said, we have electric cars, and here's an electron microscope picture of a mitochondria. Remember your mom's, great-grandma's? Her mitochondria still lives in us. It's amazing. And now the question is, we can charge ourselves up, but the question is, much like the cell phone example, our cell phone and the apps on our cell phone are our DNA comparison. And so if we don't have enough charge in our body, we're not going to flourish. We're not going to thrive. We're going to marginally survive. And when there's hurdles, like walking around that track together, we have to remove those. So that's where the organic acid test, which I was showing you with all those, the little red star comes into play. But now we can categorize, depending on how that simple urine test, organic acid test is a urine test, like, wow, okay, I can collect a urine sample on my kid or myself. And it's great for us adults too, post-COVID, long haul COVID, all this stuff. So whether it be for spectrum or non-spectrum individuals, these are tests we can all benefit from because we're all in the same human race and we're all struggling just to come across the finish line. So with that, and on my last slide to maybe address some of the questions, and I love quizzing people. So I'm sure there's some medical people in the audience, and these are called histological slides. And when I was in MD medical school, my professor was Dr. Guha. And Dr. Guha would actually put the slides under a microscope and say, what tissues are these? And of course, in order to pass the class, you have to know what those tissues are. But what do all of these tissues, I'll tell you what these tissues are in a moment, but what do all of these tissues have in common? So what we have here are testicular cells, ovarian cells, adrenal cells. We've all heard the term adrenal burnout and adrenal fatigue. Young people can have adrenal fatigue and burnout too, because their existence can be very stressful, especially in today's world. Adrenal cortex or cerebral cortex, that's for the brain. The gut, our small little intestines, our villi, the little fingerlings. Now, if we have celiac disease, they become nubbins and we're not absorbing our nutrients. So we end up becoming nutrient deficient. We now know that our small intestine also makes digestive enzymes. Our heart, if we have an average pulse of 72 beats a minute, by the end of the day, our heart will have beat 103,680 times. So I had a pen and I was to go click, 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 click along with my heartbeat. Guarantee you, my thumb would actually call the union and say, I'm out of here. They're abusing me as an employee. It's not working. So now so when we look at treating the mitochondria, we're not just treating a brain, we're treating the entirety of that person's body by taking care of the mitochondria. So that's why I love the mitochondria. I lecture on the mitochondria. I've written a book on the mitochondria. It's because the mitochondria is our ancestral battery. And the question is, things in our life that challenge our what we call nuclear DNA, nothing to do with nuclear weapons or nuclear radiation, but our genome that makes Chris, my XY chromosome, part of Chris with my mane of hair and whatnot, is it's like, how well can I manifest healing, restoration, brain chemistry, absorption, and whatnot? So mitochondria all day long.
Wow, that's so interesting. I find it so fascinating that it's passed down on the mother's side. Blows me away. Anyway, how would you summarize your approach in simple terms, and which labs and services do you utilize in your practice? So
laboratories are interesting. You want to have functional medicine laboratories that allow certain tests. So if I was to go to Quest or LabCorp, another one of the big national labs, or a hospital to get a laboratory test, they're going to run a lot of wonderful tests. God bless them. They're just wonderful. My family, I run them all the time. But there's certain things that we're asking them to do that hasn't been quote unquote accepted or approved. The science is in the literature, but it's not popularized. It's not a fad. And so I'm going to chat about that and a little bit about which tests I like to run, including organic acid, food sensitivity testing, omega-3 testing. But at the same time, I want to speak to the fact that, as you can see from electron microscope picture, that's happening in us this very moment. Zzz, and that little zzz here, that little zzz here, and also the zzz from our cerebellum, where we have more neurons in any place. We have to work the cerebellum, but on a daily basis, we lose about 86,400 brain cells. Of course, we regenerate them through neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, and we have about 100 trillion connections. Like this little walnut down here, which we used to attribute to, can you walk a straight line? Do you have a tremor? Those kind of things. Like, no, this is where the vast majority of our social interaction, our ability to speak fluently, and taking off the responsibility for the remaining 20% of the brain cells that we always say, well, it's a frontal cortex. And we all know this experience because we've all been there. So when I was 15 years old, I could apply for a driver's license. I was considered competent enough to follow the rules as long as there was a more competent person next to me, supposedly. Then at 16, I was allowed to drive, maybe with one passenger. But then at 18, I gained certain other rights as a human being in our current modern society, and at 21, others. But isn't it interesting that's not until we're 25 that a rental car agency wants to rent us a car?
Yeah.
It's always a ponderance, like, and that's pretty consistent across the board. So it's like that neurological development doesn't stop when we're 12 or 14 or 16. It's a perpetual. And we used to think IQ was static. First off, IQ, and then of course there's EQ, emotional quotient as well. But we now know that IQ is not static, and you can actually grow your IQ, and or much like moss growing on a rolling stone, you can let it sit there and atrophy as well. So with that said, when we look at the cerebellum and we look at all the different aspects and the neural networks, we need to realize that that cerebellum right down here, we've got to work it. So there's a program called Zing, and I'm not affiliate, I'm not making money from it, but I use it in my practice. I've done it myself. I've had 5 concussions and some really good headbangers, literally figuratively. Broke a windshield with my head, fell down on ice and bounced my head off the icy pavement, onwards and onwards. And so I decided I was going to start doing Zing. I noticed I wasn't as sharp as I used to be. And I wanted to make sure that my gait and my dizziness that sometimes would occur wouldn't occur. So I wanted to generate new neural networks. And that new neural network is, if you fire it, firing these, you're putting in a little electric current, chemical current, and that's just called the synapses of the chemical. And then all of a sudden you're starting to coordinate. And then when you start coordinating your motion from your cerebellum to your cerebral cortex, all of a sudden you're creating new highways and byways, basically a shortcut to get things done, which is just fascinating. And so the Zing aspect of things, it's used for attention deficits, it's used for world-class athletes are using this.
Wow.
Because it allows them to become that much sharper, that much better. But we can all sharpen our capacities. Yeah. And so what we found was it sharpens with focusing skills. Well, we can all benefit from that. And after 3 years of isolation and whatnot, and stress, well, once again, zingperformance.com. And so your child's limitations are contributed to unfinished skill development. When I was a kid in the 60s, early 60s, we were often put in little bouncers or little walkers with little wheels. That actually skipped the crawling phase, which was critical for the neural network. Little things like that. Not my mom's fault. She was a young woman. That's what they were doing back then. But I was in a bouncy chair and I was a walking chair and I skipped some of the crawling. I couldn't dribble for the longest time. In fact, I had to have rehabilitation to learn how to dribble. Then the sensitivity to sounds, the aversions to textures, close against the skin. Once again, very common within my family to have these spectrum issues. And once again, if you can stim your brain, and how many individuals in my clinical practice and in my life are self-stimmers? Many of us also, if we're not even on the spectrum, we're self-stimmers. We're trying to get our little dopamine fix or whatnot. But part of that motion or other things is that we're actually trying to get the cerebellum to jumpstart our car a little bit, is a way to look at it. And it also helps with social skills by actually working. It says me being present in front of this camera could be a stressor. But now if my cerebellum's in tune, all of a sudden what I'm doing is rote. It's easy. I'm not worried about the words. And I think all of us have given talks before. We start hearing ourselves talk. We don't like that. and so what we want to do is look at how do we help with STEM and motivation. So what's wonderful is I've spoken to the people at Zing Performance, and they are not only going to offer a promotion through your wonderful network, but they're also willing to chat with you at no charge to see are you or your children able and capable to actually benefit from it. Because you do what the treatment that's being offered here non-supplementally is 10 minutes of exercise in the morning and 10 minutes of exercise in the evening with either a phone or a tablet or a computer. And when I was doing it, I would jump on one foot, jump on the other foot because I'm not in tremendous shape. I ended up getting the old person conversion. I said, my knees are starting to hurt. So I really want to do that. And they said, okay, well, we'll give you the older version. Thank you. And so they will actually customize it. And then the program changes on how much progress has been made. It's beautifully individualized. And there's even a component to it now called the EMDR, self-directed, which helps with anxiety, PTSD, and whatnot as well. So that's kind of my answer to a non-supplemental program, working what you have. So just like I might work my bicep if I want a stronger bicep, well, why not work that brain network and what fires together wires together?
That's beautiful. So are you seeing new patients?
I am not seeing new patients at this juncture. I'm finishing up my 20th book. I write on fertility a lot. In fact, I believe there's going to be a guest, Dr. Alan Kadish, on your summit as well. And we both work together on pureliving.com. He is the owner, but we're writing on a book together on planting the seed with infertile ground. And I give the example of a sunflower seed. So if any of us had 3 sunflower seeds, and we can plant them any place. So we say, okay, well, there's this parking lot in my neighborhood. There's a little crack. I'm going to put a seed in the crack. Okay, but the seed's going to have limitations of the roots, the nutrients, how much water it gets, and sunlight. So then I was like, well, I'm going to put it in a conventionally grown agricultural thing with Roundup and chemicals and maybe a cow wandering by every once in a while. Or we can have it in organic, pristine soil. Each of those seeds from the same mother sunflower seed have different potentials. And that's not to say that moms or dads were contributory to anything, but now we know that there's ways to identify toxins, remove toxins, and also change the statistics a little bit to your favor when you're planting a seed and trying to grow another human being.
That is beautiful. And I love what you're doing. I love what you stand for. And thank you so much for presenting at the World Autism Summit. And thank you also, Dr. Kadish, for bringing Dr. Chris on. I really appreciate that. I think everybody's going to really appreciate and enjoy what you brought together. And how can they reach you, or how can they reach the organization if they want to find out more?
Yeah, so I have a little bit more of a summary, and then and I think that will answer the question that you have.
Okay.
So,
the knot. Yes.
Being a good Greek as I am, and now some people in history would argue Alexander the Great was not a Greek; he was a Macedonian, and my office manager is a Macedonian. Right. I'm a Greek, and I'm arguing. Remember, my dad was Greek, and well, her mom was Macedonian. So Alexander the Great was said, how do we know you're a worthy ruler of our kingdom? Solve this riddle. And isn't this pretty much how we feel when we look at autism or experience autism? Like, where do I start? Yeah. Well, everybody starts with gluten. Everybody starts with casein. Everybody starts with folate or whatever they're starting with. But once again, that knot, we have to figure out where we're starting on that knot. And so Hippocrates, once again, a good Greek guy, 400 BCE, said, may your food be your medicine, medicine be your food. But the Roman, we love our Romans as well, Lucretius, said, what is food for one is poison for another. Like, oh, that's another way. So for me, if you were to feed me an avocado, I would say, well, Karen, I thought we were friends. Actually, my lips would blow up, my airway would close down because it's bitter or poison. But avocados are supposed to be the magical fruit from California, right? And so then, of course, Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut. I am a big believer that gut health is foundational to everything virtually in our body. And so that's why I like to do stool testing. And I love this Lucreticus quote again, because it balance out the Greeks and the Romans here. Truth kindles light for truths. And so one of the things that can be done simply is to avoid histamine-rich foods. So histamine-rich foods can cause all of these symptoms: anxiety, fatigue, dizziness, heart palpitations. I experience a lot of those, by the way, when I eat histamine-rich foods. I would sit down and have a great little piece of spanakopita, spinach pie. And boy, I'm feeling a little racy. My ears are turning a little red, and I'm feeling a little dizzy. Well, that could be histamine. So these histamine foods are very simple to say, okay, well, I'm going to avoid them for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, while making sure we get the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients elsewhere in the diet or supplement. And it's like, okay, well, what about chocolate? What about strawberries? Well, we also know that both strawberries and spinach are on the dirty dozen foods. And for those in the audience that don't know about the dirty dozen foods, those are the ones that if you can't purchase and don't have the means to buy them organically, you probably shouldn't buy them. And spinach and strawberries top the list. There's a group called EWG, EWG.org, and they publish every year the worst 12 foods to eat if they're not organic, and 15 clean foods. So I say, okay, well, whether they're organic or not, these are okay. So once again, they're empowering, but like drinking green tea, drinking black tea can be problematic. And alcohol, of course, we've all seen people turn red from the histamine flush.
Huh.
And so interesting, as I finish up here, histamine-free diet, food sensitivity testing, measure the energy pathway, that little circle, that urine test, heavy metal test, because heavy metals are a big issue. I grew up in a household with no seatbelts and lots of smoking. So likely to have cadmium pretty high. I got not only fluoridated water, I got fluoridated toothpaste, I got fluoridated dental care, and I actually got fluoride mouth rinse and swallow as a child in school, all of which can be problematic. Doing a DNA test, when I did my DNA test, I found certain strengths, but I don't need to worry about those because they're pretty easy. I found certain weaknesses, like I need to take a special kind of folate called methylene tetrahydrofolate. We also have other things like catechol and methyltransferase, but a good DNA test will give you an insight as to what you need, making sure we have our omega fatty acids dialed in. Stool testing, no brainer on that, because whatever's living in us, and it's kind of interesting, if you've ever had a yeast infection or you've had a dysbiosis, imbalanced bacteria, and they say, and you say, well, I'm really craving something. Are you craving it, or are they craving it? Because we have to remember, they, the bacteria, I'm personifying them as a little Pac-Man here, or woman, they eat before we even eat. They're down there going, num, 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 num. And so they kind of say, feed me, feed me. Sleep apnea test, you can do that as a home sleep study, and also neurotransmitter testing. You can measure brain chemistry through a urine test these days. And now the question is, that's all great and wonderful, Chris, but where am I going to get these tests? My doctor's not going to do it. It's not going to be covered by insurance. And when Karen and I started a conversation, I mentioned I have a $13,800 deductible. I have a huge deductible. So I can go to a doctor and ask her to do a blood test for me, but it's all going to be out of pocket. I rather come in with my list of tests. I have these tests stopped, and now let's have a visit, opposed to starting on ground zero. And then we have, of course, organic acid testing, DNA testing. Once again, I am not making any money off of Vitality Health. It's a group that allows access directly to consumers. So that's wonderful. And they definitely support what the project is here today. Mm-hmm. And then we have omega-3 fatty acids, food sensitivity testing. So you don't have to guess, food is your best medicine, so eat the avocado, or as more Lucreticus, let's not do that. So Zing Performance is the organization, and they've actually normally have a starting fee, and then you have to pay a monthly fee for the attendees of this conference. They're willing to actually waive the monthly fee. So you just pay the one fee and you get all 12 months to allow yourself, if you're just wanting to excel in whatever you're doing, your kiddos to actually thrive and see, can I work my brain a little bit more? No different than a bicep, just another kind of muscle. It's not really a muscle, I know that. And so that's the concept. So thank you very much. And thank you for all your time. And yes, I'm a wall of sound. I'm used to giving hour-long lectures, and I just sit up there saying, I hope everybody doesn't leave. And strange enough, people don't leave. They're like, This guy talks fast at the very least.
Well, it's a wealth of information. It really, really is, and I think people need to watch this like several times or lots of times to digest everything, literally. It's a lot of information and it's really, really good information. And thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you, and keep up the good work. You're doing a wonderful job. And we as a community, we're going to share this information and all the other information we learned through the summit. And it's going to be mind changing, body changing, and societal changing, because we all feel scared and adrift and sometimes helpless. But together, we're a community and we can make it happen.
And this is a global summit, it's a World Autism Summit. So hopefully it'll change everywhere in the world. We have a big world there. So a big vision.
Well, just keep up the great work, and thank you all, and may you all be well, and may you all thrive and not merely survive.
Great. Thank you. I love thriving. Thank you so much, Dr. Meletis.
Thank you.
Thank you.